Their names have become second nature to us when speaking of iconic historic rulers, but their final resting places, on the other hand, still remain a mystery. For centuries, the tombs of some of history's most well-known names have evaded us, adding further intrigue into their persona and legacy, and probably even further elevating their popularity status. Today, we're looking at 3 of the most puzzling lost burials in the ancient world, and maybe we'll even uncover some clues that could point us in the right direction along the way. I would have no right in calling this a Lost Tombs video without speaking of Alexander the Great. Despite us knowing quite a lot about the 3 tombs that were built for Alexander the Great, we've still not been able to locate any of them. After creating one of the largest empires of the ancient world and then dying at the ripe old age of 32 in Babylon in 323 BCE, Alexander's body and final resting place became an object of contention and argument amongst his generals. According to historians Quintus Curtius Rufus and Justin, Alexander requested to be interred in the temple of Zeus Ammon at the Siwa oasis shortly before his death. Apparently, Alexander believed or perceived himself to be the son of Zeus Ammon and wished to be buried with his so-called adoptive father instead of his real father Philip of Macedon in Aigai. Once he died, Alexander's body just stays in Babylon for 2 years because it literally becomes the subject of negotiations between his generals Perdiccas, Ptolemy I Soter, and Seleucus I Nicator. While all this is going on, what happened to his corpse after his untimely end appears to be very Egyptian. He was essentially embalmed and mummified, and then his body was placed in a coffin of, quote, hammered gold that was fitted to his body, according to the writer Diodorus. This is rather telling as to what Alexander would have wanted after his death, as the Macedonians traditionally cremated their dead. Now, Perdiccas then spent a god-awful amount of his own money to create this huge, elaborate funeral cart to carry Alexander to his final resting place. This cart took 2 years to build and appeared to be a temple or grand building on wheels made from only the most precious and exclusive materials and crafted from masters in their field from across the empire. Diodorus describes this carriage as built to reflect Alexander's glory. It's made of gold and inlaid with precious stones. It even smelled amazing, and the casket was covered with magnificent purple cloth, which was the most expensive color back in the day. The carriage was pulled by 64 mules wearing golden crowns and collars studded with precious stones. It was in this luxurious contraption that Alexander's body began his journey to his tomb in 321 BCE. But where was it going? Well, definitely not Siwa. His final request was denied, and Alexander was on his way to Macedonia because, heaven forbid, Perdiccas let his leader's body be buried in Ptolemy's territory of Egypt. And on the way through every village, everyone comes out to witness this spectacle. This parade and spectacle would have been like nothing anyone had ever seen before, so if you were around the area, you could not miss it. But while Perdiccas had one motive, Ptolemy had very different intentions of where Alexander should be entombed. So what does Ptolemy do? He hijacks the funeral procession to end all funeral processions in Syria and diverts the body back to Egypt, but not to Siwa. Instead, Ptolemy interred Alexander in Memphis, the center of Alexander's government in Egypt. It's also quite a fortified city, so this would aid Ptolemy in protecting his newly stolen trophy. With Perdiccas out of the picture, Ptolemy then sets his sights on burying Alexander's body. It was likely buried somewhere like Saqqara, just outside of Memphis. There is a story that Alexander may have, for a time at least, been laid in the empty sarcophagus of Nectanebo II, the last native ruler of Egypt. This, of course, would have done wonders for Ptolemy politically. This would have linked Alexander with this important ruler and therefore legitimized Ptolemy's claim to the region. After a brief stint in Memphis, Alexander was moved to Alexandria in Egypt in the late 4th or early 3rd century BCE, where he was reburied not once, but twice. First, his body was likely in a tomb that was entirely devoted to himself, But the second and final time was in this grand communal tomb built by Ptolemy IV to house a number of kings and all of the Ptolemaic successors. So essentially, we have Alexander being buried 3 times in various places in Egypt. This third and final mausoleum was called the Soma, which means body, and is the one we know the most about thanks to several historical accounts and notable visits. This wasn't in keeping with the hidden tombs of the Valley of the Kings. This mausoleum was visible. You could go inside, and all of the bodies were on display, including Alexander's, which of course eventually became a sort of pilgrimage site for many rulers and generals throughout history. In 89 BCE, his golden coffin was melted down and replaced with a glass or crystal one, so you could literally gaze upon his mummified remains. Famous people said to have visited the tomb of Alexander are Julius Caesar, who paid his respects, Cleopatra VII, who looted the tomb for gold to finance her war against Octavian, and the Emperor Augustus himself, who is said to have placed flowers on the tomb and a diadem atop Alexander's head. Throughout the centuries and millennia, Alexander's tomb shows up in various accounts. It was looted by various rulers, even potentially as late as the year 400 CE, when Emperor Theodosius I ordered it to be opened and pillaged. It's believed that the tomb was possibly destroyed around this time, the 4th or 5th century CE, probably due to the rise in Christianity. There was a large wave of destroying pagan monuments and spiritual centers, and remember that Alexander was such a powerful figure, he essentially became a deity to many. There was even a Ptolemaic cult of Alexander the Great founded, and his tomb was the focal point. Even if it was destroyed, it still seems that the cult of Alexander may have lived on at least 1,000 years after this. We have an account from the 1500s by Leo Africanus, who visited Alexandria when he was a young man and wrote, "In the midst of the ruins of Alexandria, there still remains a small edifice, built like a chapel, worthy of notice on account of a tomb, in which sepulchre, they assert, is preserved the body of Alexander the Great. An immense crowd of strangers come thither, even from distant countries, for the sake of worshipping and doing homage to the tomb, on which they likewise frequently bestow considerable donations." So if it was destroyed, but maybe not completely, where are the remains of this monumental mausoleum today? Well, we're told through accounts that this mausoleum was in the palaces district of Alexandria, which you would think would help archaeologists in locating it, but unfortunately, not enough of the Ptolemaic dated archaeology remains for us to determine the official layout of the city or identify any local or official buildings from this period. It's possible that some parts of it have survived and it's buried under the modern city of Alexandria, but even if this is the most likely option, the Egyptian Supreme Council for Antiquities has officially recognized over 140 search attempts for Alexander's tomb. 140. That doesn't even count the people at home searching or the ones who have been doing things unofficially, don't do things unofficially. The numbers are probably astronomical. Searches and claims for the location have been documented as early as the mid-1800s. Even Heinrich Schliemann of Troy fame tried to locate Alexander's tomb in the Nabi Daniel Mosque in Alexandria, but application to excavate was denied. Others, like Triantafylos Papazoi, have developed theories like Philip II of Macedon's tomb in Greece was actually Alexander's. One person says they found a tomb belonging to Alexander in Siwa, but we know that no one allowed him to go there, so that's probably off the list. In more recent times, Andrew Chugg, in a 2011 episode of a National Geographic television series named Mystery Files, claimed that Alexander the Great's body was rebranded as Saint Mark the Evangelist, and the tomb itself was converted into a church in 392 CE in order to save his remains. The remains were then stolen from Alexandria in 828 by Venetian merchants who believed the body to be that of Saint Mark and brought it back to Venice, where it was then interred in the famous St. Mark's Basilica. Chugg also published an article in the Egyptology journal Kemet in 2020 stating that a 3rd century BC fragment of a high-status Macedonian tomb found embedded in the foundations of St. Mark's Basilica in Venice back in 1960 is an exact fit to the part of the tomb casing of the sarcophagus of Nectanebo II. So we've come full circle back to Alexander's first residence. resting place. It's a fantastic theory, and if it holds true, this is stuff right out of a Dan Brown novel. Most recently, Egyptian officials claimed in 2021 to have found Alexander the Great's tomb in the Siwa Oasis near the Libyan border with Egypt, and in 2024, Egyptologist Christian de Varvarten published a book called Locating the Tomb and Body of Alexander the Great, and in it he proposes that Alexander's tomb may have been placed in the eastern desert of Egypt in order to protect it from destruction. Despite these numerous attempts at finding it, I fear we will be no closer to it until technology advances enough for us to see archaeological remains under modern cities, as I believe the strongest argument for the location of Alexander's tomb is that it was in Alexandria proper. That, or luck just happens upon us and a construction project in the city digs up another clue. Of all the conquerors throughout history, perhaps none was as great as Genghis Khan. Also known as Genghis Khan and born in circa 1162 CE, he became the first Khan of the Mongol Empire and spent most of his life uniting the Mongol tribes and launching military campaigns that resulted in him conquering large parts of China and Central Asia, meaning he ruled over history's largest land empire that stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea. While he was great and powerful, we actually don't know that much about Genghis Khan's life itself, or in fact, his death. He himself was illiterate, so we have no direct sources, just sources from those around him and after his life. To keep it brief, we do know that he killed so many people that the carbon levels of the planet dropped and essentially brought about climate change. He had so many children that tens of millions of people living today still share some of his DNA. He allowed his subjects religious freedom, and under his jurisdiction, women even had the right to divorce and own property. Was he ruthless? Yes. Was he brilliant? Also yes. Genghis Khan's death occurred around August in 1227, but again, we know very little about this. We have no idea how he died or what might have killed him. According to the explorer Marco Polo, who spent some time with Kublai Khan, a descendant of Genghis, he died as a result of an arrow injury to the knee. Other stories state that he died falling off his horse or from succumbing to wounds from battle. Another says he was killed by a princess who he had captured in war, and some claim disease like malaria or typhus got him in the end. We will never know, unless maybe we find his body. Let's see. So now he's dead, and with any great ruler, or anyone who ever lived at all, he must be provided a burial. But here's the problem. Before his death, Genghis Khan requested that his body be hidden so that no one could ever disturb his remains. Not wanting your grave to be found is actually a pretty smart move, especially if you're gonna be buried with all of your worldly riches. Just look at the pyramids. They were looted pretty much immediately because they were giant markers just screaming to be broken into. Genghis was much smarter than that, but he was much more ruthless as well. The sources are a bit confusing, but it appears that 2,000 slaves attended to his funeral and were killed by soldiers sent to guard them, or they were buried with Genghis Khan. These are, again, conflicting sources. And then these soldiers were then killed in turn by another group of 1,000 soldiers who carried his body back to Mongolia. But to make sure that no one knew where they were taking the body, they killed anyone who saw them along the way. This is the complete opposite to Alexander the Great's funeral. Then, once they finally reached their destination, they all committed suicide. I'm hoping the final destination meant their homes and not around the grave, because, like, that would have been a big clue as to where Genghis was. Other legends say 1,000 horses trampled the area to erase all markers of earth that could hint at a tomb, and another even says that a river was diverted over it afterwards so that no one could ever just stumble upon it. Honestly, there are so many stories, and the sources are all quite fuzzy. Some say trees were planted over it, he was buried in permafrost so no one could get him. One source, the Erdeni Topçi from 1662, claims that Genghis Khan's coffin may have already been empty by the time it arrived in Mongolia. This last record has become one of the more logical and accepted ones over the years because Genghis died when he was waging war in northwest China, quite a distance from his Mongolian homeland. Imagine killing everyone you saw for over 300 miles. seems a bit impractical. So some historians believe that he was buried somewhere in this northwestern China region, and that the procession and pomp back to Mongolia was just a decoy and led potential enemies and robbers even further off the scent of the real tomb of Genghis Khan. Is it in China? Is it in Mongolia? There are compelling accounts on both sides, to be honest, but most agree that he was brought home to Mongolia because the idea of a homeland is very important to Mongol culture. There's another story, because of course there is, about a young camel being buried with the Khan, and the poor baby camel's mother would lead the Khan's family back to the tomb when needed to visit and honor his death. That poor mother camel remembered exactly where her baby was buried, and then every year they would just let her out and let her go on this little pilgrimage. It's really sad. Of course, when the mama camel died, so did their tour guide, unless someone took notes and secretly passed them down in the family, or else this would appear to have been a very silly navigation system. This also doesn't make much sense logistically, because even Genghis Khan's grandson and successor, Kublai Khan, did not know the whereabouts of his tomb, and if this camel lived for a decent amount of time, I'm sure Kublai Khan would have been part of this pilgrimage and remembered where he went. According to Mongolian chronicles from the 17th century, Genghis Khan was buried in Mongolia with 40 very well-dressed girls and sacrificial horses, but failed to provide the location. There is mention from the Yuan dynasty that all great Khans of the Mongols were buried around Genghis Khan's tomb, which goes against the whole hidden tomb thing, in a place that was called the Chinian Valley in Chinese. Unfortunately, however, the exact location of this valley has never been mentioned in any documents, so that doesn't help us anymore, does it? Marco Polo said this was in the Altai Mountains, but that's still a huge area to search in. And finally, yet another story is that his wife prepared his body for burial in a rather simple way to honor his humble roots, dressing him in a white robe and felt boots, and wrapping him in a scented white felt blanket that was then bound with 3 gold straps, and this is how he was buried. Regardless of how Genghis Khan was buried, many scholars believe that he would have been buried with a rather substantial amount of treasure that was looted by the Mongol army during his raids and campaigns. Most of that treasure has never been found. My guess is that it was likely all melted down over time, so that's one big factor to think about as well. This lack of clues has done little to deter researchers and explorers from dedicating their one and precious life to hunt for Genghis Khan's tomb. And I mean, I can't blame them. Finding this tomb would be a wealth of knowledge and probably actual wealth as well. But there is allegedly a curse that says if the tomb of Genghis Khan is ever opened, the world will end. Well, if that's not enough reason to stay away, maybe we go with the more practical one, that Genghis Khan is so highly regarded by Mongolians today that they very greatly want his final wish of not being disturbed to be respected. But of course, there are still those who push to seek and find. There was a joint Mongolian-Japanese expedition in the 90s that was closed down after the population feared that the scientists planned to dig up Genghis's remains. Another joint American-Mongolian expedition was funded by a retired commodity trader, Maury Kravitz, and assisted by Dr. D. Bazargor on the Genghis Khan geohistorical expedition that found a walled burial ground on a hillside near the town of Bat Sharit, which was not too far from Genghis Khan's presumed birthplace. The site didn't contain his tomb, but it did contain at least 20 unopened tombs of high-status individuals. The problem with a lot of expeditions for a tomb like this is that we have no idea what we're looking for. There is no historical record of the tomb, meaning there's no description of what it might have looked like, or any other identifying markers to give us any hint as to where to start looking. Not to mention that Mongolia is huge, and most of it is wilderness, so getting around for said exploration is extremely difficult. There are very few roads, and when I say very few, I mean very few. So moving all the equipment you need is just a nightmare without wheels. The most agreed upon guess as to where Genghis Khan's tomb could be is near a mountain called Burkhan Khaldun, located in the Khenti mountain range of northeastern Mongolia. This mountain was made sacred by Genghis Khan and is still protected today. In 2015, a French team used drones to investigate a mound on this mountain without the approval of Mongolian authorities. So it was rather a stealth operation, but they did conclude conclude that the mound was man-made and possibly a tomb in the fashion of a Chinese imperial style. And in fact, the French team's speculation might actually hold water. The Secret History of the Mongols, the oldest surviving literary work in the Mongolic languages, written sometime after the death of Genghis Khan, does claim that Genghis Khan often sought refuge at Burkhan Khaldun and carried out religious worship there. There's also a passage in another text where Genghis is actually quoted as saying, "Our burial site and that of our offspring will be here." This work was written after his death in the early 1300s though, so that needs to be taken with a tiny grain of salt. Burkhan Khaldun is still a protected area today though, so no work can be done in that area at the moment. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and women still aren't welcome on it. Oh, and did I mention that there were at least 5 mountains with this name at one point? It just keeps getting worse. The Secret History mentions Burkhan Khaldun, but it doesn't actually say which one or where. It's just assumed that it's this Burkhan Khaldun closest to Genghis Khan's birthplace. In 2009, Dr. Albert Yu Min Lin, working on the National Geographic Valley of the Khans project, used satellites, drones, and geophysics, plus ground exploration, in search of the missing tomb of Genghis Khan. And then in 2015, he set up a crowdsourced project asking for anyone to tag potential sites of the burial via satellite on the internet. This resulted in a publication claiming that 55 sites are archaeologically significant. Unfortunately, there is still no sign of the tomb. And to make matters worse, we have another problem, because of course we do. Some people believe that the Xiongnu, also known as the Xiongnu people, are ancestors to the Mongolian people, and therefore Genghis Khan. They were a nomadic people who date to around the 3rd century BCE to the 1st century CE, so much earlier than Genghis, but their burial customs could give us a clue. I'm skeptical because a lot can change in 1,000 years, especially with burial practices, so this is a bit of a stretch. But this whole episode is a bit of a stretch, so let's get into it anyway. The Xiongnu buried their dead kings in wooden log-lined chambers 20 meters below surface level. These tombs were then marked with a square of stones on top. Inside were riches like Greek textiles, silk, horses, iron weapons, and ornaments made of precious metals like gold and silver, decorated with images like leopards and unicorns. Royal imagery that was also used by Genghis Khan and his descendants. Now, if this theory does hold water and Genghis Khan's tomb followed this historical style, but without the stone markers on top, imagine how hard that would be to find. 20 meters below the ground. Impossible. As you can see, one could go on about the theories, multiple sources, and fantastical stories that contradict each other and themselves at times, and all the expeditions pretty much for a week. The most recent claim in 2022 was that a large tomb found near the Onon River, where they were building a road in the Khenti province, might be Genghis Khan's. Nothing has been confirmed as to whether this is the actual tomb, but it is quite large and dates to the 13th century. The remains of a man aged between 60 and 75 were uncovered under a stone slab, and there were 68 skeletons found on a stone structure that were probably the slaves who built it. There were also 16 female skeletons who were most likely concubines, and 12 horses that were sacrificed to the burial. Apparently, the site had been buried beneath the Onon River until the 18th century, when it changed course. All signs point to a freaky coincidence, but again, nothing has been properly published that I can find, and nothing has come to light to even confirm this as anyone's tomb in particular. When it comes down to it, Burkhan Khaldun seems the most likely resting place. But while finding Genghis Khan's tomb would have a monumental effect for both history and a lot of political stuff that we don't have time to get into today, the truth of the matter is that many Mongolian people don't want him to be found today because of their traditions and beliefs. And regardless of what people today feel, Genghis Khan himself put in every effort possible not to be found. So maybe we just let sleeping dogs lie with this one and respect the wishes of a dead man. You would expect that the remains of Britain's national heroine, the queen consort who almost very nearly drove the Romans out of Britain, would have been interred in a mausoleum or tomb fit for such an honor. But alas, archaeologists are still unsure where Boudica's final resting place might be, and it's likely they may never find out. Boudica was married to Prasutagus, the leader of the ancient British Iceni tribe located in modern-day East Anglia in England during the 1st century CE. They referred to Prasutagus as king, but not to her as queen, so we can think of her essentially as queen consort, but many people still call her Queen Boudica, and to be honest, after what she accomplished, I think she deserves it. Boudica and Prasutagus had 2 daughters, and they ruled independently of Rome, but still under their purview. When Prasutagus died, his will stated that he intended to leave his kingdom jointly to his daughters and to the Roman emperor. But under Roman law, women were forbidden from inheriting any type of power or rule. It's unclear whether Boudica or her daughters were at all Roman citizens, but ultimately, Prasutagus' wish was denied by the Romans. His kingdom was annexed by the Romans, and all his property and that of the Iceni were taken. According to the writer Tacitus, when Boudica stood up to the Romans about their deceitful actions, she was flogged, and her 2 daughters were raped. After this egregious offense, in the year 60 or 61 CE, Boudica led the Iceni and other British tribes in revolt against the Romans. Never scorn a woman, let me tell you. We put up with a lot, but if you wrong us, there will be flames. And flames there were with Boudica. Over the next several months, the revolt resulted in the destruction of Camu Londunum, modern-day Colchester, Londinium, which is London, and Verulamium, near St. Albans. The conflagrations. Targeted female rage knows no bounds. In total, an estimated 70,000 to 80,000 Romans were killed by Boudica's army. Boudica's army was so mighty and caused such a stir that Emperor Nero at one point even considered withdrawing his imperial forces from Britain altogether. But a final battle, called the Battle of Watling Street, took place somewhere in the West Midlands against the Roman general Suetonius. Despite Suetonius being heavily outnumbered, he led his forces to victory against Boudica. Rome had regained total control over the province. Boudica died in this final battle, either during the fight or by taking her own life when it became clear that she had lost, because we all know, to be captured in battle as a woman is probably worse than death. Conversely, another source states that she died from illness shortly after the battle. But despite her unsuccessful rebellion, she is still recognized as a British heroine, gaining even more popularity during Queen Victoria's reign. Their names both mean victory, so that helps with feeling connected, and she is often associated or merged with England's mythical warrior Queen Britannia. But what happened to Boudica's body after her death? The historian Cassius Dio wrote that she was given a lavish burial, but failed to provide the location. We don't even know the exact location of the final battle or her death either, so there's a lot of mystery going around here. Over the years, several locations for the final resting place of Boudica have been proposed. One popular idea was that Boudica was buried beneath what is now a train platform at London King's Cross Station, specifically either platforms 8, 9, or 10. This hypothesis seems to have come about in the 19th century. King's Cross was built in an area called Battle Bridge, and according to the legend, this is where Boudica had been defeated. Historians, however, now believe that the name Battle Bridge was originally called Broadford Bridge, and the word has just become misinterpreted over time. But back in the 1850s, this theory was strengthened when Roman-era remains were dug up when the station was being built. Given that London was a Roman city, this shouldn't come as much of a surprise, and there was nothing to suggest any link to Boudica, so people were just grasping at straws here. Another speculation put forward during Queen Victoria's reign was that Boudica was buried beneath Parliament Hill in Hampstead Heath, not far from the southern end of Watling Street. Seeing as this is the name of the final battle, it would make sense that people would gravitate towards this street, but historians now believe that the battle took place much further north up this same road around Warwickshire. Maybe. Specifically at the junction of Watling Street and Fosse Way. That just seems a bit too on the nose for me, to be honest. At one point or another, it seemed like any possible ancient British landmark was being associated with Boudica. Even Stonehenge was put forth as a viable option, even though that was already thousands of years old by the time Boudica was even born. Many Iron Age tombs have also been suggested, especially the ones that were in the Iceni territories at the time. One such example not in the east of England are the birdlip graves that were found in Gloucestershire in 1879. Inside was some amazing Celtic artwork and a hoard of finds containing bronze bowls, a mirror, and even ornate jewelry. This was certainly a thoughtful, rich burial. Archaeologists also discovered the skeletal remains of a woman dating to the middle part of the 1st century. The remains, along with the wealth buried with her, indicate that she was a high-status woman. It all seems to line up as a possibility that this could be Boudica. Unfortunately, without a smoking smoking gun, this could be any high-status woman who lived around the same time as Boudica. There's just nothing conclusive to give us any indication as to who this woman once was. In 2006, a team of archaeologists excavating next to a McDonald's in Birmingham found some Roman remains that led to one person suggesting that it could have been where Boudica's final showdown with the Romans could have been, as well as her final resting place. But this proposal didn't get much backing from the wider academic community. The truth of the matter is, it's very unlikely that Boudica's grave will ever be found. The Romans, understandably a bit sore and upset about the whole rebellion thing, prevented any sort of memorial to Boudica from being built. I mean, erecting a monument immortalizing the woman that sparked an uprising that almost had you fleeing with your tail between your legs would be a risky move, because it would remind everyone who looked upon her that there was hope, and if it was done once, they could rally the troops and maybe do it again. The Romans were smart and had done this whole conquering thing before, and they weren't about to risk losing this territory again, so they made sure that no evidence of Boudica survived. Even if human remains are ever found that could potentially be Boudica's, it would be extremely hard to prove it with any confidence because there wouldn't be any definitive evidence to make a conclusive statement. Richard Hingley of Durham University has said that if the Queen died in battle, the remains would probably have been cleared away, along with any weapons and debris that we as archaeologists need to find in order to join the puzzle pieces together. He's also said that it is very unlikely that Boudica would have even had a burial monument because that was not the practice of most Iron Age people in that region at the time. Of course, this doesn't stop people speculating or continuing to look for the lost queen that has become a symbol of the struggle for justice and independence, and someone who has become so important to British history. So there you have it, 3 legendary tombs that archaeologists and many other enthusiasts would give their right arm, and probably a lot more, to be honest, if it meant that they were able to locate them. There are, of course, many more of these lost tombs that we have yet to find and haunt many a historian's dreams, like Cleopatra and Attila the Hun. But that's gonna have to wait till part 2, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out when that one drops, hopefully very soon. Stay dirty, my friends!